Jasmine Crockett shocks the nation with her mic-dropping takedown of Trump. Live in Unfiltered. When Donald Trump told Jasmine Crockett to learn her place on live TV, he thought it would be just another headline-grabbing jab. He had no idea her response would shut down the room and ignite a national firestorm. Even before the cameras rolled, the atmosphere was electric. It was not excitement, it was anticipation, like the moment before a storm. Anchors flipped through their notes like stage props. Producers motioned with tense fingers. The audience, chosen with care, looked calm, but everyone felt the pressure of something building. It was just after 8 p.m. in Dallas, Texas. A nationally televised town hall had drawn together political firebrands and power players. One side of the stage? Former President Donald Trump and two loyal conservative commentators. The other? A group of Democrats, including a quiet but resolute voice, Representative Jasmine Crockett. At first, Jasmine said little. Others debated inflation, immigration, crime stats. She listened, watched, waited. Then it happened. About 35 minutes in, the conversation turned to leadership and accountability. Trump leaned forward, that smug grin in place, and said the line like it was rehearsed. Maybe if some of these young politicians stopped trying to go viral and started learning their place, this country wouldn't be in such a mess. He never said her name. He did not have to. Some in the crowd chuckled nervously. One moderator tried to pivot. But Jasmine lifted her hand. Her voice was calm, measured, even. Mr. Trump, she said, locking eyes with him, I know you're used to applause for nonsense. But respect is not about age or title. It is about character. And with your record, maybe you should sit this one out. Silence. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. But it felt eternal. Then came the gasp, sharp and real. Someone near the front whispered, "Whoa." Microphones caught it. Trump blinked, leaned back, reached for his water. But for once he had no comeback. Not yet. That pause, those few seconds, were not just dead air. They were history being carved in real time. Cameras caught everything. The stunned moderators. The squirming guests. The audience frozen. The nation watching. Clips spread online within minutes. Edited. Remixed. Scored with dramatic music. It went viral before the credits rolled. Some hailed it as the moment Gen Z finally planted its flag in Congress. Others accused her of disrespect and political grandstanding. But one thing was clear, no one could ignore it. The show went on, technically. Immigration, education, national security. But nothing felt the same. Jasmine sat taller. Trump looked rattled. Every movement carried new meaning. And Jasmine? She did not gloat. She did not smirk. She simply listened, like someone who did not come for applause, but for accountability. This was not a staged moment. This was real. And while the room tried to recover, the real aftershocks were just beginning. By the time the broadcast ended, Jasmine Crockett's name was trending on 6 different platforms. Late-night hosts dropped jokes. Podcasts recorded emergency episodes. Cable news broke programming to replay the moment. But Jasmine? She went quiet. Her phone blew up. Friends, professors, family, numbers she did not recognize. Support poured in. So did veiled threats. DMs, screenshots. Angry emails. But the air felt different. Not just viral, seismic. By 6 a.m. the clip had 11 million views. By 8:30 CNN booked her for a primetime segment. By noon, think tanks were drafting op-eds. One praised her for flipping the power script. Another accused her of chasing clout. The Trump campaign fired back fast. A spokesperson called her rude, unprofessional, and proof of why Democrats were out of touch. It worked. His base went into overdrive. But Jasmine? She disappeared for now. No tweets. No live streams. No interviews. She was not hiding. She was planning. For the next 48 hours, Jasmine Crockett remained completely out of the spotlight. While media pundits speculated, dissected, and debated, she was tucked away at her godmother's home in Fort Worth. No staffers, no security, just family. She kept her phone on silent and barely touched her laptop. But she watched. Watched the replay. Watched how people reacted to it. Watched the tremors her words had caused. Leonard Ramos, her chief of staff, was juggling a storm. News requests flooded in. Political allies wanted statements. Rivals sent passive-aggressive texts disguised as advice. But Jasmine remained calm, focused, measured. She knew moments like this did not come often. And if you did not shape them, someone else would. She finally broke her silence on a Thursday morning. Not with a press conference. Not with a viral tweet. But with a call. To her district office. Let's schedule the community forum in Oak Cliff, she said. It was not what her team expected. Not after all the attention. But Jasmine knew exactly what she was doing. If the world was watching, she would not perform, she would serve. Let them see where she came from. Let them hear what really mattered. The following evening, under fluorescent lights in a local recreation center, Jasmine stood before 90 constituents. No cameras. No speeches. Just a mic that crackled slightly every time someone stepped up to speak. Residents asked about school funding, gun violence, and food deserts. She answered every question, sometimes pulling policy notes from her tote bag. The crowd was not starstruck. They were engaged. Because she was not speaking as a celebrity, she was listening as a public servant. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, the pressure was mounting. Her absence had created a vacuum. In her silence, others began shaping the narrative. Conservative pundits called her a coward. Liberal strategists whispered about media overexposure. But none of it fazed her. That weekend, Jasmine quietly met with young activists, educators, and small business owners across Dallas. She visited a church in Pleasant Grove, a soup kitchen in South Oak Cliff, a robotics class in a public charter school. And everywhere she went, people asked her the same question. What are you going to do next? Her answer was always the same. The same thing I was doing before. Just louder now. But louder did not mean reckless. It meant strategic. Calculated. On Monday, she returned to Washington. Her staff had organized her schedule down to the minute. Interviews. Strategy calls. Committee briefings. But Jasmine waved it all aside. Clear the slate, she said. Just give me a desk, a coffee, and a briefing binder. Within hours, Capitol Hill was buzzing with her presence again. Journalists lingered outside her office. Colleagues dropped by unannounced. Some offered praise. Others tried to mask their discomfort behind polite smiles. But one thing was undeniable. The tone had shifted. And Jasmine felt it. She felt it in the hallway glances that lasted half a second too long. She felt it in the committee meetings where her voice now drew immediate attention. Some listened with curiosity. Others with skepticism. But none could ignore her anymore. Leonard watched from the sidelines, managing press inquiries, coordinating with legal advisors, fielding requests from networks still desperate for that first interview. He had been through storms before, but nothing quite like this. In private, Jasmine told him, "This is not about me anymore. It is about what this represents. If I flinch now, I send the wrong message." He nodded, understanding. "So what is the next move?" She paused. Then said, "We stop reacting. We start leading." The following week, Jasmine introduced a new initiative aimed at youth civic engagement in underserved districts. It was not flashy. It did not make headlines. But it was deeply rooted in her purpose. Meanwhile, invitations flooded in, keynotes, panels, media appearances. She turned most of them down. Not because she feared the spotlight, but because she refused to be consumed by it. Instead, she began building something more powerful than a viral moment. A legacy. Back on Capitol Hill, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman from Texas. She had become a symbol. But symbols can be dangerous things, especially in a city that runs on control, hierarchy, and optics. The moment she walked into any room now, something shifted. Conversations paused. Smiles grew a little tighter. The energy, once indifferent, was now alert, sometimes cautious, sometimes confrontational. Her staff noticed it too. Committee invites came with caveats. Panel moderators emailed ahead to remind her to keep the tone constructive. Even within her own party, old guard lawmakers started using phrases like responsible messaging and party discipline. She was not surprised. She was prepared. At a closed-door caucus meeting that week, a senior Democrat, Representative Blaine Kirkwood, spoke with a familiar brand of condescension wrapped in charm. "You know, Jasmine, there's a time for fire and a time for finesse. The cameras love fire, but legislation needs finesse." Jasmine responded without raising her voice. "Respectfully, I have been using finesse my whole life just to get in the room. But fire is what makes people look up." A few chuckled. A few did not. But no one interrupted her again. Outside of D.C., her momentum was building in a different way. Local leaders in Atlanta, Oakland, and Detroit reached out, not with congratulations but with ideas. They wanted to co-sponsor community dialogues. They asked her to keynote civic engagement workshops. Young organizers were cutting clips from her speech and turning them into rallying cries. Back in Dallas, a group of high school students created a mock town hall debate assignment titled Finding Your Voice, centered around Jasmine's viral moment. Teachers emailed her office asking for Zoom drop-ins. College debate teams analyzed her rhetorical timing and poise. In civic life, she had become a case study in courage. But courage did not insulate her from consequences. 3 days after returning to Washington, Jasmine received an anonymous letter hand-delivered to her office. No return address. Just a single line written in thick marker. "We're still watching." Her staff flagged it to Capitol Police. The officer was calm but firm. "You're getting too visible. That makes you a target." Jasmine folded the note in half, placed it in her desk drawer and locked it. She was not rattled. But she was reminded. Visibility came at a price. And she had paid before. She remembered her early days practicing law in Dallas, walking into a courtroom and being mistaken for a clerk. Getting overlooked during legal strategy meetings. Having senior male attorneys try to speak over her until the judge ruled in her favor, and then act surprised. She had spent a career proving her worth in rooms built to ignore her. So now that the world was watching, she did not flinch. She doubled down. One morning she held a press conference, not to talk about the town hall, but to unveil a new bill that would strengthen federal protections against voter suppression. Her voice was steady. Her facts were sharp. She fielded every question, even the loaded ones. When one reporter asked if this initiative was just another viral moment, she smiled. "If defending democracy is a trend, then I hope it never goes out of style." That line trended too. Meanwhile, internal political resistance began to mount. Key committee members who once promised support suddenly needed more time. Donor networks grew hesitant. Even her own party's whip team started pushing back on her media presence. Leonard warned her. "They're going to start freezing you out slowly. Deny access. Delay your bills. Put you on subcommittees that meet twice a year." Jasmine nodded. That's how systems survive. Starve you of oxygen. But she had already planted roots outside the system. A national coalition of young progressives formed organically online, calling themselves the Mike Movement. They rallied behind Jasmine not as a hero, but as a blueprint. Their slogan? Speak even when they say sit. They started hosting virtual town halls, voter registration drives, and policy explainers using Jasmine's congressional initiatives. This grassroots energy caught fire. It did not rely on party structures or major media platforms. It grew from group chats, classrooms, and community centers. And Jasmine, instead of controlling it, nurtured it quietly. In private, she began mentoring a group of first-term representatives who had faced similar pushback. Latina reps from Colorado and New Mexico, a South Asian rep from Illinois, and a white working-class rep from Michigan who had grown up in foster care. They met late nights, off the record, to swap stories, share strategies, and remind each other why they came to Congress in the first place. "You have to outlast the storm," Jasmine told them. "That's the only way to change the weather." Then, just when the media frenzy began to quiet down, another storm hit. A conservative PAC ran an ad using doctored clips of Jasmine's town hall appearance, twisting her words to make it seem like she had called veterans entitled. It aired in 3 swing states. The backlash was immediate. Her office received over 2,000 emails in a single day. Some were threats. Some were heartbreakingly disappointed voters. Jasmine released a statement. It was not defensive. It was surgical. "These attacks are not about my words. They are about my presence. Because I dared to speak truth in a room where silence was expected. I will not apologize for being clear." That response landed harder than the smear. Cable networks brought her on again. This time, not for confrontation, but for commentary. She spoke about policy, strategy, reform. And slowly the narrative began to shift again. She was not just a moment. She was becoming a movement. And those who underestimated her? They were running out of ways to contain her. The morning Jasmine Crockett stepped back into the Rayburn House office building, there was a noticeable hush. Not the absence of noise, but the kind that sinks in when everyone knows something is about to shift. The old playbook of quiet correction and private warning had failed. She was still rising, still speaking, and the halls of Congress had begun to feel it. Jasmine's face was now everywhere. News tickers, Sunday panel discussions, magazine covers, and most potently, across millions of social media feeds that translated her poise into power. It was not a campaign. It was a phenomenon. And unlike most overnight political sensations, she had not faltered. But as with all firestorms in Washington, the quiet retaliation was already underway. Behind closed doors, moderate Democrats began floating talking points to distance the party from confrontational figures. Emails leaked to the press hinted at discomfort with the tone set by the younger representatives. Anonymous sources spoke of internal fractures. The whispers were growing teeth. One afternoon, her chief of staff Leonard walked into her office holding a briefing folder. "There's a proposal to reshuffle committee assignments. Yours included." Jasmine barely looked up. "They're trying to bury me in logistics." He nodded. "Budget Oversight Subcommittee. No press. No high-profile bills." She leaned back in her chair. "They want to punish me with silence. But they forgot," she added, "I know how to make noise anywhere." That same week, Jasmine attended a policy forum at Howard University. She did not headline the event. She sat quietly in the third row. But during the Q&A, a young law student asked what to do when speaking truth got you iced out. Jasmine stood to respond, uninvited. "Keep speaking. Because if they can silence you, they will forget you. And if they forget you, they will rewrite you." That clip alone earned 3 million views in 24 hours. It was not about virality. It was about visibility. Meanwhile, her district office back in Dallas was flooded with visitors. Constituents who had never attended a town hall now showed up just to thank her. Young black girls left handwritten notes in the mail slot. Veterans who had believed the PAC smear came in to apologize after watching her full statement. And among them quietly were survivors of abuse, discrimination, neglect, who said her defiance made them feel less invisible. Jasmine kept every note. But with public admiration came private risk. Late one night, as she reviewed policy drafts alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed. Leonard had forwarded an email. No subject line. No sender info. Just an attachment, a blurry photo of her speaking to constituents at a community center. Written underneath, "Next time you will not see us." Capitol Police were alerted again. A patrol car now parked outside her home each night. Her mother, shaken, begged her to come stay in Shreveport for a few days. Jasmine declined. "I cannot let threats feel like commands." But even she knew the pressure was mounting. She began noticing the fatigue, her eyes slower to open in the morning, her breath catching more often before interviews. The weight of carrying a movement on your shoulders was not just emotional, it was physical. And she was running on fumes. So she disappeared. For 4 days, Jasmine Crockett vanished from the public eye. No posts. No statements. No sightings. Cable news speculated. Opponents gloated. Allies worried. She was not hiding. She was recharging. In a lakeside cabin owned by a friend from law school, she turned off her phone, cooked her own meals and slept without interruption. She reread James Baldwin and wrote in her journal. She watched the water change color with the sun and let herself feel something she had not felt in weeks: stillness. When she returned, her energy was different. Not louder. Sharper. The first place she went was not Capitol Hill. It was a food bank in Oak Cliff. She put on gloves, packed boxes, loaded trucks, and took no photos. People recognized her. She smiled, worked, and left quietly. Then she walked into a committee hearing 2 days later and dismantled a housing bill with surgical precision. Her questions were focused. Her tone was calm. Her data was airtight. The sponsor of the bill stumbled. Jasmine never raised her voice. Afterward, a senior Republican approached her. "You could be dangerous," he said. "I already am," she replied. Back in her office, Leonard had more news. "There's a summit next month in New York. Women in Government Leadership. They want you as keynote." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure it is not a trap?" He grinned. "They said, quote, she's already shaped the conversation. We want to hear what comes next." She accepted. The keynote went viral, not for its theatrics but its honesty. Jasmine spoke not of politics but pressure. Of being told to shrink in order to stay welcome. Of the quiet costs women pay for every public step forward. She ended with one sentence. "I am not loud because I want attention. I am clear because I want change." The standing ovation lasted longer than the speech. But as the applause echoed, Jasmine Crockett knew it was not an ending. It was a transition. She had begun as a local advocate, became a congressional voice, then a viral moment, then a threat, and now she was something else entirely. Not just a name. Not just a story. But a new kind of blueprint. By the time Jasmine returned to Washington after delivering her keynote in New York, something had changed, not just in the press or the public, but in the way her colleagues looked at her in the halls of Congress. Some smiled with reluctant admiration. Others avoided eye contact altogether. But they all saw her differently now. And Jasmine felt it too. She had become more than a representative. She had become a test. of how much truth a system built on politeness and performance could tolerate. And as the test got harder, so did the tactics used against her. The pressure was no longer just whispered. It was institutional. It started with meeting exclusions. Key caucus sessions were scheduled without notice. Policy memos skipped her inbox. She was assigned late-night voting schedules that minimized her camera time. A senior staffer from another office even accidentally forwarded her a group chat discussing how to keep her out of headline-making legislation. Leonard stormed into her office one afternoon, fuming. "They're trying to erase you in plain sight." Jasmine was calm. "Let them. People are watching now." And silence looked suspicious. The media, however, had moved on, at least on the surface. There were new scandals, new viral moments. But beneath the headlines, Jasmine's team noticed a strange phenomenon. Her social media engagement remained sky-high, even without new posts. Her speeches were being reposted by educators, activists, and even a few moderate Republicans who admired her clarity. That was when the flood of letters began. Not the usual policy questions or constituent complaints. These were stories, real, raw, personal. A father in Michigan whose daughter was bullied for speaking up in class. A nurse in Georgia who had been demoted for reporting safety violations. A young intern on the Hill who said watching Jasmine made her feel visible for the first time. Jasmine read every one. She posted none. "I do not want people to think this is about attention," she told Leonard. "This is about direction." One letter stood out. It was from a retired judge in New Orleans who had followed her legal career before politics. He wrote, "I once believed progress came from policy. I now think it comes from presence. You reminded me of that. Do not fade." That phrase stuck with her. Do not fade. But visibility, Jasmine knew, was not the same as safety. One Tuesday morning, Capitol Police briefed her team about a coordinated disinformation campaign. Bots were spreading altered clips of her speeches, edited to appear aggressive. One video had over 2 million views before it was flagged. The source? A media firm with indirect ties to a prominent political PAC. "We knew this would come," Leonard said. "Yes," Jasmine replied. "But now they are scared. That matters." She decided to act. At the next congressional press conference, Jasmine did something unexpected. She showed up early not to speak, but to stand silently behind 3 junior representatives as they unveiled a housing reform bill. Her presence alone made headlines. And when a reporter asked if she was back in the spotlight, she answered, "I was never out. I just stopped shouting." That same afternoon, she introduced a bill of her own, targeting dark money in campaign ads. It was symbolic. It had no chance of passing in the current climate. But it forced uncomfortable conversations. A week later, her office received a call from a senior journalist at a major national paper. "We are doing a series on modern leadership in Congress," the voice said. "And your name keeps coming up." Jasmine agreed to the interview, but only under one condition: talk about the work, not the firestorm. The piece ran with the headline, "She did not come to play, she came to prepare." In the weeks that followed, Jasmine's focus narrowed. She started holding closed-door mentorship sessions for new staffers, especially women of color. She took late-night Zoom calls with student activists in Nevada and Pennsylvania. She quietly funded local literacy programs in Dallas using personal donations. And still the system bristled. At one budget negotiation meeting, a veteran senator joked, "Here comes our social media senator." Jasmine smiled politely. Better that than a sound-asleep senator. The room laughed. The senator did not. One evening, Leonard found her in her office, staring at a whiteboard filled with charts. "You okay?" "I am just wondering," she said, "what it costs to keep telling the truth." "Everything," he said. "But what does it cost to stop?" She nodded. "That is why I cannot." Then came the committee chair offer. It arrived unexpectedly, an appointment to lead a subcommittee on digital ethics and security. It came with staff, visibility, and legislative power. But it also came with a caveat: she would need to tone down her public critiques. "Think of the influence you could have," said the House leadership aide. "But you have to learn how to work the room, not burn it." Jasmine took a night to think. The next morning she declined. She did not want influence by permission. She wanted integrity without permission. Later that week she gave a speech, not televised, not viral, on the floor of the House to a nearly empty chamber. But the C-SPAN clip spread. Her voice echoed, "We cannot change the room if we let the room change us first." Across the country, that clip became a rallying cry for college chapters, advocacy groups, and first-time voters. She was not building a campaign. She was building a current. A quiet, steady, undeniable current. And that, she knew, was harder to erase than any soundbite. Jasmine Crockett was used to opposition, but what came next surprised even her. It was not another smear campaign or a disinformation wave, it was a strategic invitation. An invitation to speak at the annual Liberty Forum in Denver, a gathering known more for its libertarian streak than progressive champions. The email came from the forum's organizing chair, a former Republican governor who now branded himself as a centrist reformer. The offer was simple, a prime slot, unmoderated, with the theme, Bravery in Modern Governance. Leonard raised an eyebrow when he read it. "You sure this isn't a setup?" "It probably is," Jasmine replied. "But I want the room anyway." The decision sparked debate within her team. Some advisors urged caution. Others saw opportunity. Jasmine saw something else entirely, a challenge worth taking. When she arrived in Denver, the city was already buzzing with media. Jasmine stayed mostly off the radar, choosing to prep privately in her hotel room with a tight inner circle. No stylists. No consultants. Just the speech, her notes, and the weight of the moment. The room at the Liberty Forum was filled with polished donors, policy wonks, and high-profile pundits. Jasmine stood alone at the podium, facing an audience that had, just months earlier, dismissed her as a flash in the pan. She began without flourish. "I was not invited here because we agree. I was invited because I said something that made people uncomfortable. And discomfort, if you are listening, is where change begins." The room grew quiet. What followed was not a sermon or a viral soundbite. It was a slow-burn masterclass in civic responsibility. She referenced Frederick Douglass and Margaret Chase Smith. She quoted Malcolm X and Barry Goldwater. She unpacked policy with clarity, then tied it to human lives. Her voice never rose, but her message hit hard. Real governance is not built on who shouts loudest. It is built on who shows up when the microphones are off. When she finished, the applause started hesitant, then swelled. Even those who disagreed clapped. The clip of her speech, again not flashy, not viral, was quietly picked up by major outlets and featured on the evening news. Columnists described her as the most unexpected adult in the room. But the real ripple came from within the building. 3 moderate senators reached out within 24 hours. Not to praise her, but to talk policy. For the first time, Jasmine was not just being talked about. She was being talked to. Back in Washington, the mood shifted. There was less snickering and more guarded respect. She was still not fully welcomed, but she had earned something more durable than popularity, credibility. Welcomed, but she had earned something more durable than popularity, credibility. The next week, she co-sponsored a bipartisan bill on judicial transparency with a Republican from Utah. "Will this pass?" Leonard asked. "No," she said. "But it will test where the walls are. And who built them." The media called it a surprising pivot. Her team knew better. This was not a pivot. It was a strategy. Jasmine did not want to be the story. She wanted to change the story. To that end, she began hosting low-profile town halls again. Not in large auditoriums, but in laundromats, community centers, high school gyms. She sat in circles, not behind podiums. She listened as much as she spoke. Sometimes more. A local reporter shadowed her during one of these sessions and described the atmosphere as equal parts therapy and politics. That was the point. "You know what people remember?" Jasmine asked her team. That someone made room for them in a conversation they were told they had no part in. She started a podcast, not a flashy celebrity-style production, but a stripped-down voice note format where she read letters from constituents and responded. No intro music. No branding. Just voice and story. Within 3 weeks, it charted in the top 10 for political commentary. By now, even the traditional media outlets began to shift tone. Instead of questioning her qualifications, they started examining her methods. She was profiled in The Atlantic, featured in Time, and quietly interviewed for a major documentary series on political culture in America. The critics still came, but their attacks landed differently. Because Jasmine did not feed them. When a cable host called her the TikTok Congresswoman, she responded with data on youth voter registration. When a think tank accused her of emotional leadership, she published a policy white paper on urban housing reform. When a right-wing newspaper mocked her wardrobe, she wore the same blazer for 2 weeks, and posted a breakdown of how much it cost versus what one public school teacher spends on classroom supplies. Every insult became a lesson. Every misfire, a message. But with attention came new dangers. One night, as she walked to her car after a late vote, a man approached quickly from the shadows. He did not speak. Just extended a note. Jasmine froze. Security moved fast, pulling her back, detaining the man. The note read only, "Truth is not protection." Leonard was livid. "You need more security." "We already have it," Jasmine said. "But fear cannot be my compass." Still, she took precautions. Moved into a more secure apartment. Limited unscheduled public appearances. Increased internal protocols. Her team adapted without question. And she kept working. As Congress prepared for summer recess, Jasmine began shaping a new legislative initiative, the People's Power Act, focused on electoral accessibility, campaign finance transparency, and digital misinformation. "It will get slaughtered," Leonard warned. "Yes," Jasmine said. "But I would rather lose while trying to make people powerful than win by asking them to be quiet." Behind the scenes, donors began circling. Not party megafunders, but grassroots organizations, small business leaders, first-time contributors. Jasmine declined most of them. "This cannot become about money," she told her team. "We are proving something bigger. That representation still matters when no one else is buying it." As the Capitol emptied for break, Jasmine stayed behind for 3 extra days. She walked the halls alone. Sat in the chamber seats. Read through transcripts. Prepared for what came next. On the final evening, she stood at the edge of the Capitol steps and looked out at the quiet D.C. streets. The city pulsed with history. Every brick, a decision. Every shadow, a consequence. Leonard joined her. "You know, most people would take this moment to breathe." "I am breathing," Jasmine said. "But I am also watching. Because if I stop watching, they will rewrite the story before I even finish telling mine." The two stood in silence as the city lights blinked like signals only they could read. It was not about survival anymore. It was about momentum. And Jasmine Crockett was not going to let the current slow. Not now. Jasmine Crockett had become more than a trending clip. She had become a mirror. One that reflected not only what politics was, but what it could be if someone dared to hold it still long enough to see clearly. But with the shift in public attention came another, more subtle shift in Washington. The silence had not just grown louder. It had grown tactical. Whispers about Jasmine were no longer just about tone or TV moments. They were about committees, influence, and control. Senior members were making quiet moves, removing her from shortlist recommendations, sidestepping her proposed amendments, even withholding endorsements on shared bills. The message was clear: speak boldly and the cost will not come in tweets. It will come in structure. Leonard saw it first. "They're not going to come for your seat," he told her in a closed-door staff meeting. "They're going to come for your standing." Jasmine responded by doubling down on her district. If Washington was going to freeze her out, she would remind the people who sent her there why she mattered in the first place. She began a 12-stop district tour: high schools, union halls, local newspapers, medical clinics, even a food truck park. No major press, just ground game. In Garland, a grandmother pulled her aside after a town hall. "I do not always understand politics," she said. "But I understand courage." That stayed with Jasmine more than any headline. Meanwhile, another surprise emerged. A House Oversight Subcommittee invited Jasmine to participate in a panel on digital privacy and misinformation, an issue that had become central to her upcoming legislation. The invite had not come from a Democrat. It had come from Representative Dale Harrington, a conservative from Arizona known for dismissing progressive voices. Leonard was suspicious. Either he is playing chess or hoping you misstep on camera. Jasmine shrugged. "Either way, I will be ready." The hearing room was packed. Media outlets predicted fireworks. What they got was a masterclass. Jasmine entered with printouts, real-life constituent letters, and citations from bipartisan think tanks. She made her points clearly with evidence. When Harrington challenged her data, she invited him to co-sponsor a study. He declined, but not publicly. And not with a smirk. The headlines the next day read, "Unexpected grace from the firebrand. Crockett shows she can do policy too." But Jasmine was not playing for applause. She was building something more. Her podcast had evolved too. It was now being studied in college media courses. A journalism professor from Michigan invited her to guest lecture virtually. She accepted, and opened her session by reading a letter from a student who had emailed her in tears. "You do not know me," the letter said. "But you spoke the words I had never said out loud, not even to myself." In every corner of the country, Jasmine was becoming a symbol, not of defiance but of articulation, of naming the thing that always lingered unsaid in the room. And that made the system nervous. 2 weeks later, her team intercepted a leak. Certain members of her own party were planning to introduce a procedural motion that would restrict how newer representatives could introduce high-impact legislation without senior co-sponsors. It was not labeled as a direct move against her, but everyone knew. It was retaliation, dressed in parliamentary procedure. Jasmine responded by calling a press conference, not outside the Capitol but from the parking lot of her childhood church in Shreveport. She stood with her parents, her old pastor, and 3 former clients from her law practice. "I was sent to Congress by the people," she said, "and I will not be silenced by procedure dressed up in civility. If they want to change the rules, let them, but let them say why out loud." The clip went viral. The proposed rule change was delayed. But that small victory came with another cost. Security threats spiked again. Her team received more than 700 flag messages in a 48-hour span. Capitol Police briefed her in person. "This will get worse before it gets better," one officer warned. Jasmine nodded. "Then I am glad I got good shoes." Meanwhile, her People's Power Act had gained unexpected traction, not because of party support, but because of growing public attention. Civic groups across the country began advocating for it. A student-led initiative in Atlanta held an Explain the Act town hall with over 300 attendees. Another school in Detroit turned the bill into a curriculum module. Cable hosts stopped mocking and started analyzing. One editorial put it simply, "Love her or loathe her, Crockett is doing what the rest pretend to." That week, Jasmine finally agreed to appear on a major Sunday political show. Not to argue. To explain. She wore no makeup, kept her tone measured, and ended her segment with this: "We keep waiting for someone else to make the system better. But the system does not change until people inside it decide that comfort is not a goal. Integrity is." By Monday morning, her inbox had more volunteer applications than spam. And for the first time since her now infamous exchange with Trump, Jasmine allowed herself a quiet smile. The mic was still hers. And she was not done speaking. The following week brought a strange quiet. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that hums in the walls before a storm. Jasmine Crockett had crossed a threshold, one even she could feel underfoot, and the terrain on the other side looked familiar, but it was not the same. Her office was buzzing with young staffers sorting through endless emails, organizing responses, flagging threats, and planning events. But Jasmine herself had retreated. Not in fear. In thought. It was no longer enough to ride the moment. She had to start defining it. Leonard entered her office late that Monday. "C-SPAN just reached out," he said. "They want to sit down. Full hour. Just you." Jasmine did not look up. "Why now?" "Because," Leonard replied, "they realize you are not a spark. You are kindling." She smiled faintly. "Then let us burn clean." That week, Jasmine spent more time in research than she had in months. She met quietly with policy analysts, educators, healthcare workers, and veterans. She was not gathering sound bites. She was assembling truth. The kind that could not be shaken with a headline. The C-SPAN interview was unlike anything she had done before. No shouting. No interruptions. Just long, uninterrupted space to speak. And Jasmine did not waste it. She opened with her district. How policy without people was just paper. She moved into healthcare, education, prison reform. She cited numbers, yes, but also stories. Names. Faces. Real ones. When the segment aired, it did not trend. It unfolded. Across dinner tables, classrooms, and book clubs. It was not viral, it was rooted. Later that night, an older Republican senator from Maine, one who had never spoken directly to Jasmine before, left a voicemail. "I may not agree with you, Crockett, but I hear you. And that counts for something." Even Leonard blinked at that. But not all responses were respectful. 2 days later, Jasmine's childhood home was doxxed. Her parents were moved to a temporary safe house. Her mother's face, usually calm, showed something new: fear. Jasmine apologized. Her mother shook her head. "You do not owe us an apology," she said. "Just promise me you won't shrink." Jasmine nodded. "Not now. Not ever." Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, an unusual alliance was forming. 3 moderate Republicans and 2 progressive Democrats reached out, privately, to Jasmine's office. They were intrigued by her policy framework on community reinvestment. "Not because you shouted," one said, "but because you showed your work." Together they started workshopping a bipartisan draft. Jasmine dubbed it the Real Roots Initiative. Not catchy but honest, Back in her district, local leaders began mobilizing. Not with protests or rallies, but with planning boards, grant applications, outreach teams. People were acting like change was possible. And that, more than anything, kept Jasmine grounded. Still, the pressure did not stop. A prominent lobbyist offered her a back-channel deal. Pull back on the Real Roots initiative, and she could have her pick of committee appointments. She declined without blinking. The next morning, 3 major newspapers ran anonymous quotes calling her naive, idealistic, and not ready for prime time. Jasmine did not respond publicly. But in private she laughed. "They think this is a show," she told Leonard. "Let them. I am not here to perform." Instead she kept moving. Quietly. Intentionally. She visited a shelter in Oak Cliff, brought pizza to nurses working the night shift at a Dallas hospital, and sat with a group of teenagers building community gardens in East Texas. At one visit, a 17-year-old girl asked, "Do you ever feel like no one's really listening?" Jasmine looked her in the eyes and said, "All the time. But that's not a reason to stop speaking. That's the reason to keep going." Word spread. Slowly but steadily. National journalists who once dismissed her as a one-hit headline began calling her one of the most focused freshman legislators in decades. She still received threats. Still heard the murmurs. But she had found her pace. By the end of the month, something unexpected happened. Jasmine was nominated by a bipartisan panel for the Rising Public Servant Award, an obscure but respected recognition. She did not campaign for it. She almost missed the announcement. When Leonard told her, she blinked. "For what?" He grinned. "For not quitting when it got hard." She chuckled softly. "Then let's keep making it harder." Her next speech would not be televised. It would be delivered to 64 students at a rural community college in West Texas. The speech was simple. She said, "Some people think power lives in titles. I think it lives in persistence." And when she finished, no one clapped at first. They just stood. Silent. Respectful. Feeling the weight. It was not a viral moment. It was a real one. And Jasmine Crockett was just getting started.